All right, let's do this. Hey, if you remember last week, I put out a video, and it was a video in which I went through um, a social media comment that came out from Stu Scheller. Okay, so if you don't remember that, I will post the link to that video in the description so you can go check that out because I don't want to rehash everything. But Stu Scheller, former lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. If you don't remember his whole story, I go through it in that previous video. I'm not going to rehearse all that here. Um, but he put out a comment last Saturday morning, so a week ago, in which he gave an update on the process within DoD for reinstatement and back pay for those who lost their careers because of the COVID shot mandate. And I thought there were a lot of problems with his statement. I've since communicated some of those to him, and he received that communication very well. I do think Stu Scheller is a sincere guy. I don't think he necessarily understands exactly what's happening in a more big picture sense, but I do think that he is sincere and genuine. In any case, so he put this statement out on social media a week ago, and it generated a lot of controversy, a lot of heated opinions, which I think is good. It's good to have these discussions. So what I want to do today is I don't want to go through his statement. I already did that in the video that I put out Saturday. You can always go back and find that. In fact, I'll link the link to that video. I'll put in the description. But I want to look at some of the comments because there is this discussion about a point that is very important that I want us to tease out a little bit. Okay. And it centers around the relationship between military commanders and military lawyers. Now, what I'm not going to do today is I'm not going to read portions of my moral injury piece in which I talked a lot about what it means to be a military commander because I talked about that a lot. It's in my moral injury piece, and I also talk about that a lot in the video that I made, I don't know, a month or so ago, called "The Current Paradox of Military Command," I think was the title. And I talk about that a lot. So I don't necessarily want to go through that today, but if you're interested in this stuff, or if you're in the military and you want my ideas on this, then read my moral injury piece and watch that video. In that video, I actually go through some of my moral injury piece that I wrote. But again, I want to tease out this relationship between military commanders and military lawyers. Okay. But we're going to start from the perspective, because it's true, that the military is commander driven. The most important positions in the military are command positions. Commanders have command authorities. They're given these very special authorities. And at the end of the day, commanders are responsible for what their units do and don't do, for what their units achieve or don't achieve. Okay. And the commander becomes the face of the unit. And he takes the credit when the unit performs well, but at the same time has to shoulder the blame when the unit doesn't perform well. That's what it means to be a commander. You're the commander. You own everything that unit does or doesn't do. You own its mission. You give the orders to make sure that the unit is in compliance with the mission set. A lot of times there are command responsibilities to take care of your equipment. There may be, depending on if you're in a deployed environment or whatever, there may be a geographic association with your command that, hey, while deployed to this region, as the commander, you exercise command over this geographic region, etc. So there's a lot that comes with being a commander. In the military, all commanders are leaders, but not all leaders are commanders. It is a very specific position and one of immense authority in the military, regardless of the level. So the first level at which you command in the Army is at the O3 level, the third officer rank, which would be a captain. But then there are command positions that go all the way up. Okay, so anyway, so just with my perspective, having been a commander, being a commander at the time that the COVID shot mandate came out, I'm very hard on commanders because I think military commanders got this wrong. And I was a commander at the time, and I got fired for ultimately doing, I would say doing the right thing, resisting an unlawful order in what I ultimately thought was part of something much larger and much more nefarious, which I talked about 100 times on here. Anyway, but let's talk about this relationship between military commanders and military lawyers. Okay. And again, this comes out of a relationship that is, or a conversation that is happening in the responses to Stu Scheller's post that he put out last week. All right, so okay, so I'm going to read something to you guys. So this is a post that comes from a guy named Chase Spears. He's been outspoken in the military accountability movement. Go find him on X. Dr. Chase Spears, actually. And anyway, go find him. He's said some really good things. But I'm going to start by reading a response that he gives to Stu's post from last week. And in saying that, so he responds to Stu's post. I'm not going to go through Stu's post again. But Chase Spears, in responding to Stu's post, he gives a screenshot of a portion of Stu's post that kind of upset a lot of people. So Chase screenshots that and then gives his response. So his response is kind of oriented toward this one specific point that Stu makes. So that part of Stu's comment, with which Chase screenshots, is so this is Stu talking. My impression is that many people who exited the service because of poor treatment over the shot refusal want retribution. I get tagged every day with posts questioning when commanders at every level of the military will be thrown in jail for illegally enforcing the COVID vaccine. That's not going to happen. Time to move forward. Okay. That was part of Stu's post. It angered a lot of people, including me. So Chase screenshots that part of Stu's post, and then he gives his response to Stu. So Chase says, I appreciate Stu's work and transparency. That said, without accountability, I remain unable to recommend military service to young people who ask. Why? Because the machine will outlive people like Stu, Hegseth, and others. If they allow law-breaking commanders to remain, those same officers who perpetuated brazen violations of their subordinates' lawful rights retain precedent to do it again. By essentially granting amnesty for rampant lawbreaking, the principle of obeying only lawful orders is entirely dead. It's already dead in practice. But statements like this kill even its idea. So Chase is saying, hey, this is problematic. Stu, you're essentially saying there's not going to be any accountability. Now, what Stu said is, hey, there are people calling for retribution. And my response to that has been, are there people out there calling for retribution? Yes. Should those calls be taken seriously? No. What should be taken seriously, though, is the calls for justice. Justice and retribution are not the same thing. Okay? So just because we shouldn't take calls for retribution seriously doesn't mean there shouldn't be any justice. And that's going to require accountability. And what Chase Spears is saying, and I totally agree, how can people like us recommend military service for those who might want to join if we don't think that justice exists in the military? That's essentially what Chase is saying. I have the same question. Now, let's see where we get a response to this, okay? Because I'm going to start with Chase's comment, but who responds? So a guy named Timothy Parlatore responds. Well, who is Timothy Parlatore? Well, glad you asked. Let's check it out. I'm going to show you his website. Now, I don't know Timothy Parlatore. I don't know if he's a good dude or not or whatever. I do believe he's been on the Sean Ryan show. I do believe he's maybe even represented Trump in some things in the past. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know what his relationship is with DOD right now. I don't know. Does he have one? Does he not have one? I don't know. But I want to give you a little bit of background into who he is, because he's going to respond to Chase Spears. Others are going to respond to him. We're going to read through some of those interactions. There are a lot of interactions between Parlatore and others, myself included. Go read them. I'll give you the link to this stuff, but I'm just going to read a couple interactions, largely the ones that I had with him. But we started with Chase Spears. So before we read Parlatore's response to Chase, who is responding to Stu, let's figure out who Parlatore is. And again, I'm not saying he's a good guy or bad guy or whatever, but so he's a lawyer, Parlatore Law Group. Okay, that's him. All right, this is about him. He's the founder and managing partner of Parlatore Law Group, nationally recognized attorney who practices both criminal defense and civil litigation. All right, cool. What else? Okay, though already well known, he skyrocketed to worldwide recognition through his successful defense of Navy SEAL Edward Gallagher in the most significant war crimes trial in the history of the U.S. Navy. So some of you will remember all of that with Eddie Gallagher. Okay, so whatever your opinion is on that, but he defended Eddie Gallagher. He has gone on to represent several significant and high-ranking current and former government officials, including state and federal legislators, a former state governor, mayor, a four-star admiral, and even a former president, which I believe is Trump. Okay, cool. All right, great. So let's go down here. There's a lot more you could read here, but whatever. Here at the bottom, it says, in addition to his remarkable legal experience, Mr. Parlatore is heavily influenced by his military background as a former naval officer and veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom. Okay, cool, fair enough. He served as a surface warfare officer on board the USS Normandy and later as commanding officer of a reserve military police unit, Naval Security Forces La Maddalena. He also competed as a member of the U.S. Navy marksmanship team. All right, so he's a lawyer. He's a high-profile lawyer, but he comes from a military background. Okay, so he's a naval officer. Specifically, he was a surface warfare officer. He's a veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom, and he served as the commanding officer of a reserve military police unit. Commanding officer, so he's a commander. Okay, let's remember that because we're going to talk about the relationship between commanders and their legal advisors, military lawyers. All right. Okay, so let's go back to what we were saying. So I read to you Chase Spears' comment, of course, which he's saying to Stu, like, hey, Stu, you're essentially saying there's not going to be any accountability. How can we recommend that people join the military under these conditions? Okay. So this is Timothy Parlatore responding to Chase Spears. This is Parlatore. While I understand your anger, responding to Chase, legally, it's more complex. Whether an order was a lawful order or not, GOFOs, now that's an acronym, GOFO. What it means is General Officer, Flag Officer, so generals and admirals, that's what it means. Whether an order was a lawful order or not, generals and admirals have to rely on the TJAG's advice. Another acronym. What's a TJAG? TJAG, the Judge Advocate General. That's a military lawyer, specifically in this case, a very senior military lawyer. This would be the like the senior legal advisor to a specific military branch, like the senior legal advisor for the Army, which is a senior general. I think it's a 3-star. But anyway, so it would be a very senior lawyer representing one of the military branches, whether the Army or the Navy or whatever, right? So whether an order was a lawful order or not, generals and admirals have to rely on the TJAG's advice, on the legal advice from these very senior military lawyers. That's what he's saying. He goes on, if, as here, the TJAGs told them it was lawful, the generals and admirals don't have a choice. Their reliance on that legal advice would result in instant dismissal of any charges brought against any of the generals and admirals for implementing Austin's mandate. Aside from Austin, the TJAGs are the ones responsible, and SecDef already fired them. Okay. A lot of problems here with what Parlatore said. Now, Parlatore is a lawyer. Parlatore also supposedly served as a commanding officer. That's what his bio said. So, I mean, I certainly don't think he's lying on his bio. Um, so he's been a military commander, but he's also a lawyer. Now, I don't know when he went to law school. I don't know if he was ever a JAG. It doesn't say that he was a JAG in the military. So the way I read his bio, I'm assuming he was in the Navy. He served in the Navy as a surface warfare officer. You know, he's then in the Naval Reserves. Maybe started active duty, went into the reserves, and then he was the commanding officer for this reserve military police unit. And then maybe he went to law school and then just became a lawyer outside of the military. That's kind of the way I read his bio. I don't know that he was ever a JAG in the military, but he's clearly been in and around the military long enough that I would assume he understands the relationship between military commanders and military lawyers. So I don't know why he would say things that are just so factually incorrect. And they're not, it's not that they're like, how do I say this? They are wrong enough to be dangerous, okay? But they're not I mean, I don't want to say they're not wildly wrong because in some cases they are kind of wildly wrong. But anyway, let's just go through it. So whether an order was a lawful order or not, generals and admirals have to rely on the TJAG's advice. What do you mean by have to rely on? Do you mean they have to follow? They have to assume that the legal advice that they're getting is correct? Because they don't have to assume that. They can assume that it was given in good faith. They can assume that their legal advisor believes what they're telling them, but they don't have to assume it's correct. Who commands? Commanders or lawyers? Commanders. In the military, who works for whom? Do lawyers work for commanders or do commanders work for lawyers? There's only one answer to that question. Lawyers work for commanders. They are the legal advisors to commanders. In the relationship between a specific commander and his legal advisor, the legal advisor works for the commander. A commander has many advisors on his staff. The legal advisor is just one. Now, he has a very special skill set and very specialized training and education for sure. Yeah. But commanders are responsible for the commands that they give, the orders that they give, the orders that they follow. So, what does he mean here when Parlatore says generals and admirals have to rely on the TJAG's advice? What do you mean by have to rely on? If, as here, the TJAGs told them it was lawful, the generals and admirals don't have a choice. Don't have a choice. So you're saying here that if the legal advisors tell the commanders that the COVID shot mandate is lawful, the commanders have to operate under the assumption that it's lawful. That is not true. That is not true. Can commanders go against the advice of their advisors? Yes, of course. Does that include the legal advice that they receive from their lawyers? Yes. Now, that may be smart, maybe not smart, but that's why they're in command. And they have other specialty advisors that give them very specialized advice too, that they may or may not choose to follow based on their experience and their assessment of the situation. That's why they're commanders. Commanders command. Lawyers don't command. But there's more problems here. Their reliance on that legal advice would result in instant dismissal of any charges brought against any of the generals and admirals for implementing Austin's mandate. So, if the order is unlawful and a commander, like a senior level commander, was relying on the bad legal advice that they received from their lawyer, any charges against that commander for following what would later come out as an unlawful order would be immediately dismissed. That's what it says. It says instant, actually. Their reliance on that legal advice would result in instant dismissal of any charges. Well, that's not necessarily true. It's not a you don't get some sort of um, impenetrable liability shield by relying on the legal advice from your lawyer if you're a military commander. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't be a mitigating factor. I believe it would be. But it doesn't necessarily mean that in any and all cases, all legal charges against the commander would be instantly dismissed, which is what he says here. Very problematic. And then he ends it by saying, aside from Austin, meaning Lloyd Austin, the previous SecDef, the TJAGs are the ones responsible, and SecDef already fired them. Parlatore is saying nothing to see here because all the bad actors are gone. All the TJAGs are gone. The ones who were to blame for the COVID shot mandate. Lloyd Austin is gone. This has all been fixed by Hegseth. That's what Parlatore is saying here. So Parlatore, in one paragraph, gets a lot wrong. He reads the situation very incorrectly and doesn't appear to have an accurate understanding of the relationship between military commanders and military lawyers. But why? I don't know if he was ever a military lawyer, but he's a lawyer. He's been in and around DOD for a long time. And according to his bio, he was a military commander. So why does he not understand this? All right. So anyway, many people responded to him and took him to task, as they should have. I was one of them. And I said, and you can go read through the whole exchange. There are many people who responded to him, not just me. But I said, and the reason I want to go through my exchange with him is because these are my ideas. So I'm sharing with you my ideas about this. So I said to him in response, to be clear, you're saying that generals and admirals have to rely on TJAG's advice and don't have a choice, even if an order is unlawful. And then I reiterate, this is what you're actually saying, ? By the way, what made the TJAGs think these orders were lawful? This is why so many service members have learned that they can't trust their leaders. Much of the American public has learned the same sad truth. And nothing has changed under the new leadership. DOD continues to cover the crimes committed. Now, I gave those last couple of sentences there because I was reinforcing what Chase Spears was saying about, which Parlatore was initially responding to, which was, hey, how can I encourage people to join the military if there's no accountability? There's no sense of justice in the military. So I wrote this to Parlatore. So Parlatore responds, not defending the TJAGs at all. Not fair enough. Okay, cool. He goes on. They were dead wrong on many things and they got fired. Now, I don't know whether or not they got fired, but let's just assume he knows that they did. Parlatore says they were dead wrong. So, okay, cool. What I'm saying is that the generals and admirals can rely on that advice to have any charges against them dismissed. And again, he's saying this as if it's a foregone conclusion that if you're a commander who relies on the legal advice from your lawyers, then you can't have charges preferred against you for doing something that is unlawful as long as your lawyer told you it was lawful. And I think that's a dangerous statement to make. I think it would be a mitigating factor. I don't think that it gives you some sort of impenetrable liability shield, like I said. He goes on, Parlatore again, as a general proposition, if any commander goes against the advice of their SJA, staff judge advocate, military lawyer, they run a risk of being wrong. Now, that's true. If you get advice from one of your advisors, to include your lawyer or any other of your advisors that have very specialized advice, if you're a commander, then yes, if you go against their advice, you run the risk of being wrong. Like, yeah, that's true. That's what it means to be a commander, And he goes on, some staff judge advocates know that and weaponize it to try to control their commanders. Some commanders are able to call a lawyer or JAG friend and get a second opinion. I've seen some that go over the staff judge advocate's head to the force judge advocate. Okay, what he's saying here is, all right, so you're a commander. You get legal advice that you don't concur with from your legal advisor. So you call a friend of yours who's a JAG and you get a second opinion, or you go above your own legal advisor's head to a higher lawyer. military lawyer, to seek another opinion. Parlatore goes on. Back to the specific scenario, if a commander had gone against the JAG's advice on the vax, they could have gotten charged, and I would have happily represented them to an acquittal. So what he says is, now in this specific scenario, if a commander had refused to go along with the mandate, even though his legal advisor told him it was lawful, then Parlatore is saying, I, Parlatore, would have represented him because in this situation, he would have been right. His lawyer was wrong. And I would have represented him to an acquittal. And I'm kind of like, okay, would you gotten an acquittal? We've seen how the courts have been about this the last couple of years. But anyway, so he's saying, in this case, the commanders would have been right. Okay. So you're saying the commanders had a choice. In the previous statement, you said they don't have a choice. Here you're saying they have a choice. They had a choice. They could have gone against their lawyer. And if they had charges from their higher commander preferred against them, then you would have represented him to an acquittal. So here's what he's saying. So let's hypothesize a scenario where we have a military commander who hears from his legal advisor that the mandate is lawful. He doesn't concur with that legal assessment. Therefore, he doesn't comply with the mandate, and he doesn't order his troops to take the shots or whatever. Now his higher commander comes and prefers charges against him for not going along with the mandate and for going against the advice of his own legal advisor. Parlatore is saying, in this case, that commander, the one who did not go along with the mandate, which is unlawful, that Parlatore would have defended him and gotten him acquitted. Okay. So you're saying that the commander did have a choice, that he could have refused to concur or to operate on the legal advice that he got from his lawyer. He did it. So you're saying he does have a choice. But in the previous comment, you said he doesn't have a choice. So which is it? And the problem is we don't even necessarily know because we didn't have any senior level commanders that refused to go along with the mandate. I did. I got fired. I got relieved of command. Parlatore, you never come to talk to me. Now, I didn't have, just so you know, so as a battalion commander in the Army, you don't have a dedicated legal advisor. You don't have one of those until you get to the brigade level, which is a colonel, commanded by a colonel. I was a lieutenant colonel at the battalion level, which is one level below brigade. I'm being kind of tongue in cheek there, but Parlatore's like, oh, I would have represented these guys to an acquittal. Well, but you didn't have any senior military commanders that went against the mandate. Anyway, he goes on to say, so either way, I'm saying that trying to get some type of accountability from generals and admirals who had the advice of TJAGs is a waste of time because the failure was in the JAGs for the advice given. So instead of tweeting complaints about the next CNO, if you know who the JAGs were, then consider filing professional responsibility complaints against them. Now, CNO is Chief Naval Officer. So, I don't know whether he was saying that to me or to someone else. It doesn't matter. I don't know if that comment was specific to me. Maybe it wasn't. But it doesn't matter. There were many people who responded to him. But I responded to him again. And I said, you're already walking back your original assertion because you're getting called out on how incorrect it was. And what I meant by that was, you said they don't have a choice initially, and then when you come back again, you say, well, if they hadn't followed their lawyers, their legal advisors, counsel, then I would have defended them. Okay, so you're saying they actually would have a choice to not follow it. Maybe they don't like the consequences because maybe they would have had charges preferred against them. But now you're saying they do have a choice. So which is it? That's why I said you're walking back your original assertion. Anyway, he would respond to me and say, I'm not walking anything back. But anyway, whatever. I'm not saying Parlatore is a bad guy. I just don't think he fully understands this relationship which he should understand. So, but I'm going to assume he just doesn't understand it, because otherwise I would have to assume that he does understand it and he's intentionally muddying the waters, to absolve commanders of responsibility. And if that's the case, now we got a real problem. Now we got a real problem because now we have someone who's not operating in good faith. Let's just assume he's operating in good faith and doesn't understand the relationship between commanders and military lawyers. Let's assume that he is not nearly as competent as he would probably like you to think. So I say, you're already walking back your original assertion because you're getting called out on how incorrect it was. I'm assuming you've never been a commander in the military. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Now, when I made this, I hadn't gone to this guy's website to see that he supposedly was a commanding officer. But according to his bio, he was, which means, like, how do you not understand this stuff? Because you clearly don't understand it. Anyway, I go on. The burden to command is on commanders. An SJA, staff judge advocate, a military lawyer, with all due respect to their extensive legal training and education, is still only an advisor, albeit an important one. The same could be said of other highly skilled and specially credentialed advisors. Relying on the insufficient legal advice of a staff judge advocate will not provide blanket legal protection for a commander who issues or follows an unlawful order, though it could possibly prove to be a mitigating factor. Commanders remain responsible for the orders they issue and follow. The military runs on orders. Orders are generally issued by commanders. Further, the military runs via the operations process, itself driven by the commander. The military isn't currently weak because too much responsibility is placed on commanders. It's weak because its commanders are weak. Our military proved its weakness when virtually all commanders issued and followed the unlawful orders associated with the COVID shot mandate. That the military's lawyers are just as corrupt doesn't absolve weak commanders of their moral failures, cowardice, and in some cases, criminal actions. Now, I have said before, when you look at the whole COVID shot mandate, there's a lot of blame to go around. The military physicians got it wrong. And remember, at senior levels, military commanders also have, they'll have a like a unit surgeon, they have medical advisors in addition to legal advisors. So anyway, you'll have the unit surgeon, brigade surgeon, division surgeon, or whatever the unit is, and that's in the Army at tactical level units. Anyway, but I have said before, the military medical community got it wrong. The military legal community got it wrong. The chaplains got it wrong. And oh, by the way, as a military commander, you also have chaplains that also give you advice. The chaplain largely got it wrong, just like the military medical community, the military legal community. The military chaplaincy also got it wrong with very, very few exceptions. But who bears responsibility more than any other group? The commanders. That's why they command. Chaplains don't command. Lawyers don't command. Physicians don't command. Commanders command. And if you don't understand that, Parlatore, then don't go on social media and talk about stuff that you do not understand. Don't do it. Because you're allowed to have an incorrect opinion, but you're coming on here like you're some sort of subject matter expert, trying to explain things. And again, either you're not nearly as competent as you think you are, and I'm going to assume that's the case, or there's something more nefarious going on because now you're intentionally muddying the waters to try and absolve commanders of actions they shouldn't be absolved of. If you're doing that intentionally, now we have a much larger problem. So I'm going to assume you're incompetent when it comes to the understanding of command authorities in the military. So anyway, there's one other thing I want to read here. So let's check this out. Okay. So let's pull this up. So this is the website for Rob Maness.com or Rob Maness's website. You can find it at robmaness.com. So Rob Maness is a retired Air Force colonel. He's a signatory of the Declaration of Military Accountability. He's done a lot of interviews. He's got his own show. He's interviewed me a couple of times on his show. It's called the Rob Maness Show. So he has been an outspoken advocate over the last couple of years for accountability in the military when it comes to this mandate. So he wrote a piece that we're going to go through. Now, why do we care about Rob Maness's opinion? Well, like I said, he's been outspoken, in the military accountability movement, but I'm not saying we should just listen to him because I happen to agree with him. But this is a guy who had a long, successful career in the Air Force. And he served in command positions. So he understands what it means to be a commander in the military. Parlatore clearly does not. Okay. Commanders must face accountability for the unlawful vaccine mandate. This is core to preventing abuses of immense command position powers by Colonel Rob Maness. Okay. So this came out yesterday. As a retired U.S. Air Force colonel with 32 years of service, from enlisted explosive ordnance disposal technician to B-1 Bomber Squadron commander, vice wing commander, wing commander, and nuclear operations leader, I have commanded in combat zones, survived the 9/11 Pentagon attack, and dedicated my life to defending the Constitution. Okay, so he's a retired colonel, 32 years of service, commanded at various levels. Okay, so that's his area of expertise that would allow us to attribute some credibility to what he's saying here. The bedrock of our military is the principle of lawful orders. Oh, imagine that. This principle is not optional. That is why I am deeply troubled by the ongoing thread from Stuart Scheller on July 26, 2025, detailing reinstatement for vaccine mandate victims and the responses, including Dr. Chase Spears' demand for accountability, which we just read. I strongly oppose attorney Timothy Parlatore's defense of commanders, blaming the judge advocate generals and claiming good faith reliance shields GOFOs, so this is just general officer, flag officers, generals and admirals, because it is dangerously misguided. So Rob Maness says Parlatore and what he is saying is dangerously misguided. I would agree. From my command experience, I know that orders profoundly affect lives. The aggressive enforcement of the vaccine mandate through career threats, violations of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, and coercion breached ethical standards. Veterans and active duty members have courageously testified that the mandate crushed their freedoms, expelled expertise, and harmed readiness. Without accountability, this sets a dangerous precedent for future political overreach, killing morale. Doubtful orders breed hesitation, which can be fatal in battle. The mandate politicized the ranks, reportedly purging conservative, thoughtful service members and worsening the crisis. On my show, The Rob Maness Show, I have hosted whistleblowers and vaccine-injured service members, victims of both anthrax and COVID mandates, honorable Americans whose careers were shattered, health compromised, and justice denied. Parlatore's stance ignores this suffering. If commanders blindly followed flawed advice, who guards the guards? If commanders blindly follow flawed advice, who guards the guards? The Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, demands discernment. Good faith reliance on legal advice is not a get out of jail free card when rights are trampled. The Uniform Code of Military Justice demands discernment. Good faith reliance on legal advice is not a get out of jail free card when rights are trampled. Let me insert my thoughts here. The military does not need commanders who do the right thing only when it's easy to know what to do, or there's no cost associated with doing the right thing. The military needs commanders who do the right thing when it's hard to know exactly what the right thing is, or when it is costly to make the right decision. And right now, the military does not have those commanders. And Parlatore wants to defend the commanders who don't know how to do the right thing when there's a high cost associated with doing the right thing. Parlatore wants to shield those commanders from having to share some responsibility for the actions that they were involved in, whatever that might be. All right, so let's go on. Recall August 2021, Secretary Austin mandated the vaccine post FDA approval of Comirnaty, citing readiness precedents like anthrax. Proponents claimed it was necessary for pandemic protection and disrupted operations. However, it sparked fierce backlash. 8,400 were discharged. Exemptions were denied arbitrarily, violating the RFRA. Critics highlighted the experimental emergency use authorization, EUA status. Courts cited Jacobson v. Massachusetts from 1905, but settlements like the Department of Defense's $1.8 million in 2023 fees exposed flaws. The mandate was rescinded via the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, due to recruiting hits, but reinstatements now falter from distrust. Parlatore attributes blame to TJAGs for deeming the mandate legal, asserting that general and flag officers, GOFOs, had no choice but to comply, and that charges would fail without intent, and that firing TJAGs is sufficient accountability. This is inaccurate and harmful. Commanders are not compelled to follow TJAG guidance. They must verify the lawfulness independently. Reliance on legal advice does not absolve them if the mandate is unlawful. Ultimate accountability rests with commanders. This is not semantics. It is core to preventing abuses of immense command position powers. Spears rightly pushes back, arguing that unaccountable, law-breaking commanders undermine the Uniform Code of Military Justice, where only lawful orders demand obedience. This makes service unpalatable for young Americans. And I'm just going to say here, and it should. We still have a long way to go in fixing the military's culture. And you can't fix the military's culture without fixing the command culture. And right now, the command culture is very bad. We have a lot of weak commanders. And Parlatore's idea continues to breed weakness in command because it creates conditions for the accountability of commanders. Back to Rob Maness here. Scheller's post provides a candid snapshot of reinstatement under President Trump's January 2025 executive order. He distinguishes involuntary separations, 738 interested, 17 reinstated, from voluntary ones, 41 interested, 3 returned. Explains back pay deductions and notes no denials since May of 2025. Scheller admits flaws, but insists on moving forward without retribution against commanders for illegally enforcing the vaccine, urging applications via recruiters or DoD email. Informed by his own 2021 ordeal, solitary confinement after criticizing Afghanistan operations leading to court-martial, he now advises Undersecretary Pete Hegseth, championing reforms. Commanders are not bound by TJAG advice. They decide and own the consequences. JAGs advise, commanders decide is not just a slogan, it's reality. Excusing the enforcement of an unlawful mandate perpetuates injustice and erodes trust. Systemic fixes such as better exemptions, oversight, and ethics training, are insufficient without holding individuals accountable for egregious actions. Okay, so Rob Maness, I've been on his show before. Rob Maness is a good guy. He clearly gets it. He's a smart guy. He wants to help. But in this situation, he also understands what he's talking about. 32 years of service, having commanded at various levels, understanding what it means to command and what it means to advise commanders. Okay? So, Parlatore doesn't get it. Why he doesn't get it, I don't know. He shouldn't be on social media spreading ideas that are not just incorrect, but also dangerous. But people like that have to be called out. It's not about being mean or whatever, but these ideas are dangerous because right now our military is exceptionally corrupt. Now, I'm not saying Hegseth hasn't changed some things, but Hegseth has gone after, in my opinion, has gone after a lot of the low-hanging fruit. The more substantive problems are all still there and aren't even being addressed. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem in the abstract with going after the easy problems to solve first, building some momentum, and then going after the larger problems. But you do have to go after those larger problems. And some of those problems are so large that it doesn't matter how many of the small problems you fix. If you never address the larger problems, ultimately, the military will not improve. And I unfortunately, I think that's kind of where we are. So I'm not saying Parlatore is a bad guy. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I have no idea. But I am saying he doesn't get it. We're going to assume that he is a good, a person operating in good faith that's just confused, Otherwise, we have a much bigger problem. But we're just going to assume that he's just somebody who is exercising his right to express opinions online, which he's free to do, of course. But those opinions are wrong. They are bad and they are dangerous, and he should be called out for it because he should know better. So don't listen to Parlatore. Listen to guys like Rob Maness who actually know what they're talking about when it comes to military command. So I will link in here the video that I did about Stu Scheller's post from a week ago where I went through the post in detail. And then I will also put the link in here to my own video about the current paradox of military command, where I talk a lot about the nature of command. And I'll also give you the article, the link to the article that I just read from Rob Maness, because I do want you to go check it out. And you should follow him as well on his X account, and follow Chase Spears too. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.